find such a love at our age. Whoever thought we could dance on a thrilling...
Welcome to Couples Therapy in 7 Words. I'm your co-host, Judy Alexander, and I'm here with my husband, Dr. Bruce Chalmer.
Hello, Judy. Hello, viewers and listeners. Judy, tell folks the title.
I Think I Want Out, Managing Marital Crises, an interview with Dr. Becky Whetstone.
We just finished that interview. She's really interesting, and her particular spin is on how do you manage that moment or series of moments when somebody says, the straw that broke the camel's back, I think I want out. And everything changes at that point. And she wrote a book about that, and she works with folks, especially about getting through that turmoil. Funny, we should talk about navigating turmoil, because it occurs to me that perhaps we could mention a book I wrote on the subject that is rather related.
Oh,
Little segue there.
really? Okay, so I guess that be your latest book that we're talking about? Betrayal and Forgiveness, How to Navigate the Turmoil and Learn to Trust Again.
Exactly, and we did touch on that in our interview, because of course that overlaps a lot with what Becky does as well.
As do some of your other books, such as,
ooh, good segue, nicely done.
Reigniting the Spark, Why Stable Relationships Lose Intimacy, and How to Get It Back.
Indeed, those times when stable relationships lose intimacy sometimes lead to marital crises.
Yes,
and you have
they
to
do.
Navigate the turmoil. And
oftentimes, it's not about communication, why everything you know about couples therapy is wrong.
Which is to say, go ahead.
Which is to say, everything you know is also wrong, but also has information there on crises that couples face, yes?
Well, it does, yeah, and actually what that's about is sort of looking at the process of therapy itself. How can therapy be helpful?
Right.
So that's, if you're into wondering how do you make the best use of therapy, it's good for that. And if you're a therapist yourself, that's especially good. Although I think the other ones are good too for therapists themselves.
And I was watching, this is a little segue here.
No, go ahead.
I was watching, I think it was CBS Sunday Morning, and they were talking about divorce rates, and they were talking to a divorce lawyer, and he was saying that divorces are actually on the decline. And one of the people that they interviewed who said why she thought divorce was on the decline is because people are seeking out more marriage therapy and couples therapy these days. And it's been very helpful, and couples therapists are getting better. So great advice from Dr. Becky and Dr. Bruce.
There we are. Nicely
some
done.
Great books and some, if you're in that type of crisis, seek out somebody that can help you.
And whether or not you're in a crisis, I would say this particular segue is especially if you're not in a crisis. If you're feeling good about your spouse and you want to feel even more excited with your spouse, perhaps...
Or maybe you just got rid of your spouse.
There's that possibility too.
And you want to have a little bit of excitement in your life, I recommend reading The Blue Tent, Erotic Tales from the Bible by Laria Zilber.
With whom I have to tell you right here in front of everybody, I've been carrying on an affair with Laria.
Oh,
yeah.
See, now you guys are the first to know.
See, I've never seen you and Laria in the same place.
Yeah.
So for all I know, when I've been with Laria, I haven't been with you.
Yeah.
For those
we won't go into that.
just to be completely explicit here, folks, perhaps those of you who know us know that Laria is your nom de plume. Laria is Judy. I do like to tell people, though, I've been telling people, if you go to Laria's website, which is lariazilber.com, I'm going to spell that for those of you who aren't watching this, Lariazylber, lariazilber.com. You will not only learn all about that book and get, be pointed to places where you can acquire it easily, you will also get to see videos of Laria herself, who does bear a considerable resemblance to you, except that Laria happens to have blue hair. But aside from that, she looks a lot like you. Two beautiful women that I'm involved with. What can I say?
Oh, you're kind.
My cup runneth over. Anyway, on that note, shall we go to...
I think we should.
Before we precipitate a marital crisis of our own, let's bring on Dr. Whetstone. We'll see you on the other side.
Our guest today is Dr. Becky Whetstone. Dr. Whetstone is a marriage and family therapist who has helped hundreds of couples strengthen their marriages and deepen their connection. She draws on her own experience of challenging relationships and applies the lessons she's learned, along with her research and experience, to helping couples make decisions with clarity and grace. Her recent book is I Think I Want Out: What to Do When One of You Wants to End Your Marriage. Becky, welcome to Couples Therapy in 7 Words.
Hi, Judy and Bruce. Thank you for having me.
Well,
I
we are
wish I could
delighted to have
solve,
you.
thank you. I wish I could solve all couples' problems in 7 words or less.
Oh
Don't we
yeah,
all?
well that's what we just figured. I don't know why we bother going on. I don't know why I bothered writing 3 books about it when I could do it in 7 words, but somehow it
Exactly.
seemed to require a little explanation. So
Exactly.
we always like to start off by asking our guests, how did you get into the work you do? Tell us something about your own journey.
Well, I've been obsessed with relationships since, I was a young teen. I used to be obsessed with reading advice columns like Ann Landers and Dr. Joyce Brothers, Dear Abby, and then I loved Irma Bombeck too. So
Oh
I
yeah.
started fantasizing that I was going to be an advice columnist when I grew up and have a sense of humor doing it, throwing in the.
Mhm.
I was born kind of a comic kind of person. So, and so I, went and majored in journalism in school and, long story short, finally made it to the newspaper in San Antonio. They wouldn't let me write an advice column. They made me write a fully baked, column about relationships. And I was a single mom at the time. So I kind of wrote all about that. And I became kind of a relationship guru in San Antonio, and I was on TV and radio a lot, and people would call in and ask me their questions. But the criticism I always got was that I didn't have the credentials to be speaking authoritatively. And I really did
Oh.
consider myself a reporter at the time. So I would interview experts, for whatever I was writing about. But I got tired of the criticism, so I went to graduate school so I could shut people up. And I ended
Great
up
reason to go to graduate school. There you go.
And well, there's just one reason I think some of my professors were skeptical of my, arrival there. Like,
Mhm.
almost felt like they were being used or something. But I came to love the profession of marriage and family therapy and doing the therapy process. So I ended up going ahead and getting my doctorate and doing a lot of research, and I kind of became addicted to learning. I think the information I was learning was satisfying some itch in me to understand problems. And then I just really enjoyed talking to people about their relationships and trying to find solutions to help them. So but I'm still a writer, and I write about relationships all the time. I have a blog. And then I, of course, wrote a book based on all that research I pulled up back in graduate school and since.
Yeah. Well, you've written about marital crises. Tell us
Yeah.
what is a marital crisis and how do they happen?
Well, marital crisis happens when one spouse has that serious talk at one moment or another. They may walk in the room, or maybe during a fight, but they say something like, "I think I want a divorce. I think I want out. I'm unhappy." Something like that. In this moment, everything changes, and nothing will be the same again. And when they do this, they're dead serious. It's not one of those in the heat of the moment they scream, "I'm done," and then sweep it under the rug. When the marriage crisis begins, they're dead serious, and they're going to do something drastically different. The marriage will never be the same. And so both spouses' nervous systems activate,
Mm.
and the person who's thinking of leaving goes into the flight mode. They want to run away, and the
Mm-hmm.
person who is getting left goes into the fight and fix mode, and they start running after and chasing the person who wants to leave, trying to bring them back into the marriage. And that's a marriage crisis. And I manage those situations for couples because there's so much room for mistake making and disaster when you have two couples whose nervous systems are kicked up.
Mm.
How do you manage it?
Well, the first thing I do is I educate them and I normalize it. Like this is what every couple in a marriage crisis goes through, and you're not going crazy, you're not losing your
Mhm.
mind. It's a completely normal reaction. And so just educating them about how this is going to go down, and what it's going to look like in the weeks and months to come is kind of comforting to them. But the
Mhm.
first step is to get them stabilized. And
Mm.
so I need to get the what I call the leaning in partner, the one who wants to save the marriage. I need them to stop chasing after and trying to fix the decider and love bombing them and telling them, well, I read this book and I'm having epiphanies every other 5 minutes and all that kind of, look at me, look what I'm doing. I
Mhm.
need them to stop all that because it really makes matters worse and it turns the decider off and it makes them want to get farther away from them. So
Hmm.
I kind of I'm coaching now the leaning in partner to back off and use all that energy on fixing themselves and becoming healthy as an individual in every way possible. And then I'm coaching the decider not to slow things down and to not make any rash decisions or final decisions and to just to let's get them calmed down, where they can access the better part of their thinking, and then
Mm.
we can have some rational conversations and decisions about what would be the wisest next steps for them.
Yeah. You know the name Jill Bolte Taylor? You familiar with her, the
No.
neuroscientist? I love evoking her in the very discussions you're talking about, and sort of helping people, first of all, normalize that they're freaked
Yes.
out.
Yes.
You may have heard of, maybe you didn't recognize the name, but you may have heard of her work. She's a neuroscientist who had a stroke in her 30s, which is really quite young. She had a massive left hemisphere hemorrhagic stroke. And she went on to do what became the first viral TED Talk, which was called My Stroke of Insight.
Oh,
And
wow.
the reason I mention her and I often mention to clients in this context, because first of all, you can find that TED Talk, and it's really really neat. And she's a very quirky kind of person. She wrote a book called My Stroke of Insight after that, because what she of course recovered enough to be able to write books and stuff. And she learned a lot being a neuroscientist. Of course, she wrote amazingly about her experience of the stroke. She learned a lot about what it was like to be without that analytical part of her brain and how she experienced the state of panic or the lack thereof based on different brain structures. And she went on to write another book, which is the one that I'm really making reference to here, called Whole Brain Living, where she talks about the fact that based on brain structures, we are all four different people. And it's one of them, she calls it character two, that's doing the freaking out. And when you get two people in their character two, and it's based on, upper and lower, sort of midbrain versus neocortex and left and right hemisphere. Well, it's the left hemisphere amygdala, the left hemisphere midbrain, the limbic system that's going nuts when
Well,
you're
of
freaking
course.
out. And if you get two people in where the character two is dominant, they can't, of course, hear each other. That's exactly what we're talking about when we're trying to get people to sort of back off and calm down and use the other parts of their brain to help calm them down. And it's a very whimsical book. She suggests that we name the characters. Remember when I had read the book and I asked Judy, and you hadn't read the book,
Yeah.
but I asked Judy, gee, what would you call your four characters? And what did you say? You remember?
John, Paul, George, and Ringo.
Of course.
I call mine Bad Becky.
Yes, you've got Bad Becky, but then there's the other three that aren't Bad Becky. It's really sort of cool, and just that phenomenon of normalizing for people, I find is so important. And you mentioned that, just
Yes.
and I say that to almost every couple I meet in the first session. Well, I can already tell you're not batshit crazy. That
No,
I've had a few couples I haven't said that, but mostly I say that. Yeah.
I wrote that down. I'm going to make it my business to read that book. Um, I think that I also have clients often name that part of their personality. Now, I work from a model um, based on Pia Melody's Facing Codependence and then Terry Reel's Relational Life Therapy. And in that model, they call it the adaptive child.
Mhm.
Huh.
The older kind of incalcitrant 14-year-old teenager, who's the responder to that limbic pain or fear that's being felt. And the adaptive child, protects it, but in a self-sabotaging or relationship sabotaging way.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I educate my clients about the nervous system in a very simple way and tell them about the adaptive child, and then we are going to seek to bypass the adaptive child and force ourselves to make decisions and speak out of our functional adult self. And it's
Hmm.
hard when
Yeah.
you're in crisis. It's so hard. So that's the other thing is I normalize for them how hard it is to control yourself.
Yeah.
And this
So
is
couples come to you when they're already in crisis, usually. What are some signs that couples can look for, or are the signs of a crisis, that they're heading in that direction? What are things that people can look for?
in my book, and one of the things I discovered in my research, and I was so angry because it's not common knowledge. And I wanted this to be common knowledge is marriages die in stages. And
Mm.
it's like stages of cancer. And if it was commonly known, like the stages of grief, what the stages of a dying marriage are, then you could be paying attention to that in your own relationship and know exactly when you should speak out to your spouse about it and say, I'm struggling seriously, this is a big deal, or go to a marriage therapist at that time. So it's the 5 stages of a deteriorating marriage, which begins with the process of someone becoming disillusioned in the relationship, and they say to themselves, uh-oh, I think I'm unhappy. Well, I know marriages have ups and downs, so I'll just wait and see how this goes. And then stage 2 is called erosion. And that's when they go, you know what? This is serious. This feeling's not going away. I'm unhappy and it could lead to divorce. But they quickly dismiss the idea of divorce as, oh, I can't divorce because of, all the reasons people have for not wanting to get a
Right.
divorce. And so that is the moment when people need to speak out and go to a marriage therapist and get some help, because you can really head a lot of stuff off at the pass right there. But the way it is right now is people don't speak out in stage 2, and it's an internal conversation they're having with themselves. And their other spouse may know they're kind of unhappy, but they do not understand the serious and extent of the unhappiness at this point. So this person continues on down to stage 3, called detachment, when they go, God, I'm so unhappy, but I'm gonna make a life for myself because I'm not gonna get a divorce, and I'm gonna have an affair or take up some hobbies or start working out or start traveling a lot by myself or doing things away from the marriage to maintain some sense of happiness. But they don't realize that it's their unhappiness is going to increase still, and
Hmm.
their ability to tolerate it is going to decrease,
Well,
which
Yeah.
particularly because exactly what they're doing is whatever the situation was, they're making it worse.
exactly.
Yeah.
So, yeah, exactly. So then that makes them inevitable that they will hit the straw that breaks the camel's back moment, which is
Mm.
when your spouse says or does something in one moment where you just say to yourself, you get this moment of clarity. I cannot be with someone who would do what just happened right there. And it can be the tiniest little thing. I mean, in my dissertation research, someone said their husband used a coupon at a restaurant and that was her straw, you know,
Yep.
so it could be just anything, and you have that moment of clarity. And so then they prepare to make the announcement
Mm.
that they may not divorce at that moment, but the marriage as it was cannot return. They
Mhm.
emotionally divorce at that moment. And then 5 is what I call death of the marriage, where it's death of marriage number 1. There will either be a divorce or they will have to recreate a new story with marriage number 2.
Mhm.
A lot of work on themselves.
And of course, one of the things I often note is the only way you make that marriage number two is if it's better than marriage number one was.
Well, there's no
Yeah.
doubt. We know that
Yeah.
structure of marriage number 1 was not solid, right?
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
marriage crisis begins at stage 4, the straw. That
Hmm.
where the person can't stand it anymore and they're going to basically come out of the closet with their
Mhm. Is it possible if a marriage reaches stage 5 to actually bring it back?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Like I say, when I call it death of the marriage, I just meant it maybe it should I wasn't the one who did the original research on this. Uh,
Hmm.
but in death of the marriage, it's death of what the marriage was,
Mm.
one way or the other. Like they're going to fix it and be different than ever before and hopefully functional where it was dysfunctional before, or they will part ways. And so I'm managing from the straw, through all of this to deciding what fork in the road we're going to take. And then I oversee the crisis from the moment it happens to stabilization, and then conversations about what we need to do, deciding what we're going to do, and then whatever fork they take, whether it's separation, reconciliation, or divorce, I oversee all of it to make sure that they do what's healthiest for themselves as a family. And I really feel like the marriage and family therapy field has failed couples because so many people decide they're in marriage therapy and they decide to get a divorce and then they leave therapy and they
Mhm.
don't get any therapeutic assistance through one of life's most stressful situations. So I'm proposing to our profession that we amplify this idea that we are there with you. We care about families. The lawyers do not. And
Mhm.
we can stay with you and make sure you don't tear up the town and, destroy your ability to co-parent, moving forward. Or just to heal and be healthy and to come out of this as healthy as you can when you go through one of life's most difficult experiences.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things I found interesting in your approach that I was reading about was the notion of separating. And
Yes.
I've worked with years ago, I worked with a number of clients where they would separate, but it seemed to be useless. It didn't inform them, it didn't advance the situation, it gave them it didn't even give them temporary relief because they didn't really separate. They sort of separated, but they didn't really separate. They didn't really know how to manage that. How do you handle that with folks? And how do you make a separation useful if they're going to do it at all?
All of this, my interest in this is wisdom born of experience. I went through
Ah,
a marriage crisis myself in the 90s and ended up prematurely divorced. My ex and I couldn't get along, and we just made the biggest mess in the whole world, and our children suffered. And this just has not set well with me. And I've seen it, of course, play out over 30 years, how it affected everyone.
mhm.
And our marriage therapist said when I wasn't motivated to work on our marriage and I just wanted to get away from him, he just sent us out into the ether with no advice or guidance. And then, of course, two kicked up, activated people made a mess. So, so what I needed at that time was separation. I needed to get away from him. And but when I did that, see, my husband just went nuts. He was started punishing me for wanting to leave him, and that helped me. That kind of pushed me into a quick divorce decision because I just, so if we'd have had someone coaching us, telling us like, hey, sir, you need to leave her alone and let her decompress and let her come out of this. Like he needed some coaching. So, this is kind of how I came up with this idea. And I had a lot of friends that were separating with no rhyme, reason, timeline, or purpose. And they ended up in this kind of ambivalent separation limbo. And they would either just get back together without having fixed anything, or they would end up divorced when maybe if they'd have had the proper conversations, some of the stuff that people are getting divorced over is fixable,
Mhm.
and they just
Yeah.
don't realize it. And they haven't tried hard enough and they haven't had the right therapist or haven't had the right conversations. So
Hmm.
I really felt like there needed to be a separation that's overseen by a marriage and family therapist who coaches them about all. We're going to move it forward. You're going to go to therapy during this. You're going to be meeting with the marriage crisis manager. You're going to, it's going to end at 6 months, no matter what. There has to be a decision made at that point. And And, throughout the whole process, we're taking the pulse of the marriage to see where we are and what's going on. And you can end it early. You can reconcile early, but then if you reconcile, I want you to reconcile in the ways that all the research shows works and is
Hmm.
successful, and not just run back for the wrong reasons, which the research shows if you reconcile for the wrong reasons, you'll end up divorced in 6 to 12 months anyway.
What
Yeah.
what are the right reasons?
Well, the right reasons are you missed your person. You know,
Hmm.
you had you had recognition of the value that they brought to your life, and the wrong reasons are you hated being alone. You looked around at who was out there to date, and you saw that it was pretty pitiful, and you just didn't fare well as a single person. That's
Yeah.
the wrong reason to reconcile.
Mhm.
So it's got to be about recognizing the value of your spouse that
Mm.
you had lost sight of.
Yeah. So the most recent book I wrote was is called Betrayal and Forgiveness. So and of course a lot of that is about infidelity, which is kind of the classic quintessential marriage betrayal. And I'm curious, how do you find, yeah, I don't know, how does infidelity fit into the sort of marital crises how do you manage a marital crisis where there's been infidelity?
Well, when I was a neophyte therapist, I used to listen to people's, I'm not cheating, I am not, um, and in my book, I tell people, like, if your spouse, they'll always say, well, I asked my spouse if he's cheating and he said no. And
Hmm.
I go, well, I'm sorry, but this is the only time that I'm ever going to ask a client to boundary offend and snoop around and check around, because I feel like as long as it's secret, it's not helpful. So I think if it's brought out into the open, we're going to have to deal with it one way or the other,
You
right?
mean people sometimes lie about infidelity? I'm shocked. Shocked.
Believe
Yes.
This is what
Yeah.
people can't believe it, because they'll go like, well, Ron is, he's such an honest and decent person. I go, yes, but he will lie about this. I'm just telling you,
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
lie about this, because it's everyone knows that it's wrong and they don't want that harsh judgment. And
Hmm.
while it's secret, he has the leverage of being the victim of his horrible spouse over here, who's
Right.
Hmm.
know, forced him to go find love somewhere else. But if he's outed, then the leverage changes, and the and the person who's getting cheated on has more power.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting because that what I find also there, of course, there's that piece of, yeah, they don't want to get caught. And also there is even a piece of altruism in it. A little bit. There's a little bit of saying, well, I don't want her or him to get hurt. And I know that's clearly not the dominant piece. That's not the
It's
piece
just
that's going to make them feel bad. But you kind of have to. I find I kind of have to acknowledge that piece exists as well, because that's where you get that phenomenon of a fundamentally decent person lying like crazy to their spouse.
Right. Because they don't want their partner to think badly of them.
Yeah. Well, they don't often think badly, but they also don't want to hurt them. They're
Yeah.
feeling like, well, if you don't know, maybe there's no harm, no foul.
yes, there's all sorts of crazily interesting dynamics to the
Yeah.
cheating. But
Yeah.
the way to handle it is if the person gets caught or whatever, and they're like, well, it's just an emotional affair. We only did it one time, or all this. Well, I'm
Hmm.
like, no, I'm not. I'm no longer going to sit and listen to the many lies that the cheaters tell, and we treat it as a worst case scenario regardless. Like,
Oh.
I'm going to act as if you were madly in love, you had sex 5,000 times, and because I don't want to hear the lies. And
Hmm.
unfortunately, what I tell the leaning in partner is, if your spouse had an emotional connection, they were actually in love with the person, then they'll say, okay, I'm going to quit the affair, but they're not going to. They're
Hmm.
just not going to, because they're in an obsessive state. It's like they're on heroin. They can't stop themselves. So I tell the leaning in partner, let's not listen to the lies. You have to let it play out if you can.
Hmm.
Let it play out, because it will, and eight or
Yes.
times out of 10, that relationship's not going to work out.
Hmm.
And they'll stop and go, what the hell am I doing? Maybe I should go back home. And
Yeah.
then we'll have the opportunity to repair that at that time. So,
Hmm.
but most leaning in partners, their pride and ego and sense of self won't let them sit there and let that go on. So that's a real problem. But I mean, I don't blame them. I'm not sure I could either, but that's what it
Oh
would
yeah.
opinion is. You have to just let it play out.
And it's interesting because I think with respect to that, when they can, it is really there's a lot of it works well. That's when it works well. When our seven words of the seven words are be kind, don't panic, and have faith. And the have faith part, not necessarily religious faith, but faith. The have faith part is the part that says, there's something right about this whole business, even when there's wrong involved. There's something, we're all doing the best we can, even when we're screwing up royally.
Yes.
And so there's that faith of somebody be able to say, I wish you weren't doing that. I'm mad as hell, but I'm going to let it play out. I'm still going to respect you as a person, even though you're doing bad stuff. And when they can do that, then there's hope for the relationship, it seems like. Does that square
Well,
with
you
your experience?
blog recently about how, once the marriage crisis begins, about 95% of whether the marriage can be saved or not is going to be if the leaning in partner doesn't fight them. If the leaning in partner,
Mhm.
my fantasy, the leaning in partner would say, "Oh, you're not happy with me? You want to leave? Well, let me open the door for you. Let me
Mhm.
help you pack your car. And here's a few pots and pans, and just make life easy on them and don't protest and don't love bomb them and just let it go."
Yeah,
9 times out of 10, the decider will go, "Oh my God, what am
yeah,
I?" They'll want to come back. But if you fight them and tell them, "Oh, I've read 15 books and I'm having all these epiphanies," and sending them dozens of flowers and buying them stuff, then that makes them want to get away from you. So it's,
yeah.
if leaning in partners could just show grace in the process.
Yeah.
How do you keep them from panicking?
Well, I can't, they're going to panic.
Right.
I need them to learn how to self-soothe and
Mhm.
nurture themselves and to refocus the energy to things that are healthy and positive.
Yeah, that
And
structure you're giving them, the one thing that we as therapists, I think, provide regardless of what our favorite, sort of school of technique is, the one thing we provide is a relatively calm nervous system. We're the one who's not freaking out, and that
it,
itself can be helpful to both parties, I think.
I tell them, look, I have been on both sides. I've been the leader
Mhm.
and I've been the decider. You know,
Mm.
so I can speak from experience, and clients really appreciate, that I've felt it myself,
Hmm.
what it's like. I also know what it's like to make terrible mistakes that you regret for the rest of your life. So I'm speaking from that platform too. I'm like, and I had a son who ended up at 24 being killed in Afghanistan in the Marines.
Oh my.
Oh.
God, I could trace his joining the Marines to our divorce.
Oh my.
Yeah. And so these are the things, like you just don't know how your life's going to play out.
Mhm.
Sure.
And I don't think he would have joined if we'd have stayed married. I think this was part of his dad was very kind of harsh and controlling. And I think if I'd have stayed married to him, I would have been able to soften him, and keep him off my son.
Mhm.
But without me there to temper him, my son joined the Marines to get out from under his dad's control. So though, maybe I'm wrong, but he told me I joined the Marines to get out from under my dad's control, so
Mhm.
I have pretty solid evidence. And it just, I'm just like, oh, if only I could go back, because I do think after the whole crisis of our marriage stuff was over, even though he had tons of therapy to do still, and I did too,
Hmm.
we loved each other.
Mhm.
Having, we didn't know how to do relationships and we were immature. And
Hmm.
the right kind of therapy, we could have grown up and had the kind of marriage that we all should have. So I have so many regrets, and that's kind of my message to people is you just don't know. And then when your child dies and you're divorced, you have to plan all the funeral arrangements and stuff together.
Mhm.
And now you're having to deal with each other again. So you don't even know how this situation is going to play out in your future. And if he and I had the right coaching to be cordial respectful co-parents that would have really helped. But I ended up, when my son died, not only was I dealing with that grief, but it was like fighting with him over what we were going to do and how we were
Yeah.
going to do it. It's like going through another divorce.
Sure.
Yeah.
Bringing up all those old feelings of
I've got a lot of
anger.
this for people about, you just don't know how life's going to play out, and getting along over a long haul is so important. You just have to do it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's the thing when a couple divorces and they have kids, be they adults or not, they don't have the option of having nothing to do with each other. I mean, the circumstance that brought you and your ex back together is every parent's nightmare, of course. And that, you know, the fact that you can talk about that and I'm feeling this sense of, oh my God, you don't deserve to feel guilty about that. You know, shit happens, that it couldn't be that your son died because you got divorced, but there's you've had to
You know
wrestle
how
with
the
that or
brain
something.
likes to do that math,
Mhm.
and going, well, if this hadn't happened and that,
Yeah.
the way we think. And I'm, had enough therapy in my life to be able to life coach myself out of those kind of things. I did
Mhm.
what like you said earlier, I did the best I could with where I was at the time.
Mhm.
And look what's happened. I've made lemonade out of lemons because I'm
Mhm.
taking all the lessons that I've learned and I'm using them to help people not make the mistakes that I made. And I got to dedicate the book to my son. So
Mhm.
Mhm.
I know that he would be absolutely blown away that I'm doing this work, and he would be
Mhm.
very proud. So that's helpful. That's
Yeah, it's
helpful.
interesting. You don't know how many couples your work, you don't know how many potential kids you've saved in that same way by doing the work you're doing with all the couples you do.
I hope so. And
Yeah.
on the end, and I'm sure y'all have had the same experience. I mean, people will just say, like, we wouldn't be married if it wasn't for your help,
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
and you just get that feeling of, oh my, of just humility, but gratification. Like, I'm so thankful that I'm able to do this work and that what I'm saying meant something to someone,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
so humbling.
Yeah. That's the sense it feels like a sacred calling. There's something about it that's, wow. And it's an incredible privilege and honor to be admitted into people's lives that way
It is. It
in
is.
hopes you can actually help them. It's repairing the world. It's not just that couple. It's really
I
helping.
have a question for you guys, because probably when y'all are in school, and me too, it was like you're supposed to keep this mask of, professional mask, and you're not supposed to care and even love your clients and care
Mhm.
about and love them. And I have found that to be nonsense.
Yes.
I don't see how you can talk to people about some of their deepest, darkest pains and witness their tears and their pain and anguish without connecting with them in a really human way and caring about them and really loving them on a human level. What do y'all think about that? Am I
Oh,
off base?
yeah. Oh, God, no. No.
Well,
It
I'm going
was,
to let Bruce take it
yeah.
because I'm not a therapist. I'm a
Oh,
retired educator. And
oh, okay.
so,
Yeah, she's
but
the real person. I'm the therapist. But no, but I was going to say, in terms of being an educator, you've always loved your students. That's one
absolutely.
of the things that, and I've always loved my clients. And it's interesting, the longer I've done the work, the better I've gotten, I think, at loving my clients. I used to get really pissed off at the asshole guys because I saw myself there, like, oh, I'm capable of that. And I had to learn how to not hate them, and actually and now I can talk to everybody. It took a while, but it is all about loving your clients. And in terms of, the concept of, do you reveal anything about yourself or do you have to be this sort of, blank screen? Oh, baloney. Yeah. There are schools of thought, even for individual therapy. And one of my periods of training, I did a lot of stuff in narrative therapy, if you're familiar with that. Michael White, may he rest in peace.
I'm on a date with Michael White.
You did.
Yes,
Wow.
yes. And
I
then
am
he died
impressed.
like 2 days later. He
He,
died. He literally died 15 minutes after hanging up the phone with me.
Oh my God. Well, I
Yeah.
thought he was
Wow.
partnered
Some
at the time though.
interesting stories.
Yeah.
I've had
Well,
some life experiences that are wild. You wouldn't believe it. But that's one of them. I met him in Galveston in Texas at a conference. And then, and we went on a couple of dates. And he was at the end of a divorce
Yeah,
himself
from
and
Cheryl. Yeah, yeah.
flew to San Diego to do a conference. And he called me from San Diego on Monday night and told me he was going to call me on Friday and he was going to try and come back to Texas and see me again. And then I found out 2 days later he had dropped dead about 7 o'clock Monday night. We talked at 6.
Oh
Oh,
my.
wow.
Wow. Well, that's amazing. Well, then you
See?
know well.
Yeah, I
That's
know.
one of the, yeah. Yeah, one of the things about narrative, aside from the fact that, apparently, the wrong kind of conversation can make the founder drop dead. But but aside from that, he does talk about, I mean, the narrative does talk a lot about showing up as a person, situating yourself in your own experience. And so, we still have to be careful that, when I talk about my own experiences, I have to be careful with clients that I'm not doing it for my sake. But if
Well,
it's relevant, and it so often is, because I don't like to give people the idea that I'm speaking from some sort of mountaintop, or, this is what science says. No, this is what I say based on my understanding. What do you think? I never want to give people the impression that I think I know better than they do how to live their lives, because I don't.
I
I
agree.
don't.
I agree. I agree that we shouldn't be sitting on a throne of, you know, what, we know have the answers to everything. It's ridiculous. But
Yeah,
I'm glad. I think our profession is trending in this more human way, and I hope so. I self-reveal because I've had so many life experiences that I've learned these very deep lessons from, and I'm happy to share them if it's helpful to somebody, and it
yeah,
makes them again feel like, oh my God, even my therapist had this problem. It was
yes,
Mm-hmm.
yes, exactly. Yeah, validation. It's
yes.
it's so central, that sense of,
I want
then
to
someone can relax.
something wrong with me. That's why I'm having these problems. And I'm going like, look, you and millions of others
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
indeed.
kinds of
Exactly.
things.
So how can people get in touch with you, and how can they get your book, and tell us, give us some information. We'll put it in the notes for the episode as well.
You can get my book at most any booksellers.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, so you can also find it through Simon and Schuster. If you Google Becky Whetstone book, you'll find my book and it'll show you all the booksellers where it's available. And my website is marriagecrisismanager.com. And so I do help people in marriage crisis. I offer support groups and classes and things like that to help them through. But I also work with people that are in unhappy marriages or marriages that need tweaking. I just am crazy about couples and relationships and endlessly fascinated with trying to help them. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that's what I do.
Mm.
Great. So the name of the book, I Think I Want Out, What to Do When One of You Wants to End Your Marriage,
Yeah.
by Dr. Becky Whetstone.
Well, thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you for having me. You ask great questions.
Well, thank you for that. You give great answers. So there we are.
Thank you.
Welcome back. We hope that you enjoyed that interview with Dr. Becky, and we hope that you have found some very valuable advice from her. And if you are one of those couples in crisis, I would say give Becky a shout out.
Yes, and get her book. And by the way, get our books too.
Yes.
Do get our books. And you know what? Not only get our books, but I also want to put in a plug for review our books. In the session, I keep saying session notes like I'm a therapist, because I am. In the episode notes for this, you will find, if you look there, a link not only to buying my most recent book, you will find a link that takes you directly to the review piece on the Amazon page. So you can just give a rating, and if you wish, give a review. Love those 5-star ratings, of course. Love any nice things you have to say about the book. That would be great. So I would really much appreciate more of those, because the more of those I have, the more people find out about the book.
Absolutely. And if you enjoyed this podcast, please follow us and subscribe and tell your friends and do all those things that people on social media do to spread the word.
And what should people do if they want to get in touch with us and maybe make a suggestion about a
good
topic
idea.
or a guest or whatever?
Yes, you can go to our website, ctin7.com. That's CT as in couples therapy, in 7, the number 7,
ctn7.com, and you will find, among other things, there's a contact form there. There's even a place where you can go to our scheduling link if you want to sign up to record an interview with us. If you think you'd be a good guest on our podcast, in that process of signing up for that, we will ask you, gee, what do you want to talk about? And that's where you'll tell us why you think you might be a good guest, and I'll bet you would be. If you think you would be, I'll bet you would. And so until next time,
Remember, be kind
don't panic.
and have faith.